Grab your woman, it's a Louie Louie time.
Tonight on Sports at 11, the reunion continues. From the Casper Energy Studio in Calgary, the boys talk about the Flames, and Grant talks about the biggest controversy in his Flames career. Now, the opening act for Three Dog Night, the Four Neat Guys.
I wanted to ask you about your Flames coverage. And I want you to talk a little bit about your philosophy covering the Calgary Flames, because that was huge for our show to get that credibility right off the bat.
I remember Mike Vernon once told me, says, Pollock, why are you raising shit? Why don't you leave that for the writers? Well, that's exactly what I didn't want to do. I didn't want people to read the good stuff, the controversial stuff, the rumors in the paper, just in the paper. I wanted them to watch our show and maybe get some good insight from watching Sports 11.
Are you going to tell the story about Terry Crisp in the playoffs? Because that was a tough time. That was not a lot of fun for you at that point.
Yeah, go right ahead. I was going to bring it up anyhow.
I bet you were, big boy.
Well, it does tie into what we're just talking about, and that is trying to be a good sports reporter as well as an on-air TV guy. So during the playoffs in 1990, so this is the year after the Flames won the Stanley Cup. The Flames are still a viable Stanley Cup contender. They were struggling down in LA against the LA Kings. And I had heard from a very good, reliable source from within the team that it was chaos inside the Flames dressing room between periods in Game 4 down in Los Angeles. With me hearing that information was Al Mackey, a reporter for the Calgary Herald. He and I were both hearing that. The next day on the flight home to Calgary, I knew Al was going to put that in the Herald. So what I did, I wanted to beat him to the punch. I went right to the station and put something on the air that night so I could beat the Herald to the big story. And I told the story of what I just relate to you guys, that there was chaos in the dressing room from the report that I had heard. And I think the Flames should do something that's unprecedented. They should fire the head coach in the middle of the playoffs and replace him with the two assistant coaches. It happened pretty good the year before at the Stanley Cup. Well, that was kind of a crazy story, I admit. I beat the Herald. I did what I wanted to do, but it called chaos. Chaos with 2-7 management, chaos between me and the Flames. It was unbelievable. Would I do that again? I think I would like to break the story the same way, but I wouldn't do it the same way. I would have couched it differently. I would have told it, not with a sledgehammer, but something different. But I was so pumped in being this guy breaking the big story in the playoffs. I probably would have couched it a little differently today.
But you went down to practice the very next day. That's what I was proud about you for that. You didn't shy away. A lot of guys would have.
You know, here's the sad part. He and I had developed over the last couple of years. When did he arrive? 88? So the last couple of years, a pretty good relationship. When he and I would do something in the studio during a Flames and 2-7 hockey game, he would call us the Ron and Don of the West because we had this pretty good rapport.
He was our first guest on the first Sports at 11 show, Grant.
He and Michelle Cameron, who just arrived back from the Seoul Olympics in 1988 with her gold medal in synchronized swimming. They were the first guests. You're absolutely right. So I jeopardized that relationship, and that kind of bothered me. But Crispy always told me, he says, Pollock, if you ever want to be critical, if you ever want to editorialize, you got to have the guts to show up the next day in my office. So what did I do?
Did Fletcher smack you once and tell you the same thing?
Yes.
What was that all about?
Well, I just want to finish the story in that I did show up the next day, as Mike said. As soon as I walked into his office, he looked at me and says, "Get the frick out of here! You." I did show up, but he ripped me a new one. And I didn't talk to Crispy for years. And that bothered me a lot too, that I jeopardized that relationship. So yeah, maybe I won the confidence of the reporting in fraternity in Calgary, but it cost me something. And Crispy and I have kissed and made up since, though. He came up to me about 8 years ago at a get-together here in Calgary. And he says, "You were just doing your job. Don't worry about it." But yeah, that brings back a lot of memories. Now that guy's was 30 years ago, 1990.
And what was the Cliff Fletcher? He gave you the same kind of advice once.
No, well, so the next day we had to go back for Game 6 in LA, and I don't know why I got bumped up to first class on the way to LA, and I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I've been through the ringer, and I'm just kind of leaning back on my chair in the airplane. Well, the guy sitting behind me is Cliff Fletcher. He hasn't said much about what I said. Well, I'm just kind of nodding off, and he whacked me across the head with a newspaper, scared the living crap out of me. He goes, "If you're going to raise hell, you're not going to be sleeping on this flight, buddy." That's all he said. That's what he said. He was not mad at me. He was one of the few people in the Flames organization at that time that didn't give me heck. He said, "Nah, you got to do your job. We'll do our job." You know, the only thing that kind of saved my bacon was that they did fire Chris, 2 months later, a month later. Good story.
Showed a lot of guts on your part, though, Grant, because it was a big story. I remember reading the Globe and Mail where
Al Strachan,
you were going to lose your job as the host on the Flames games because of what you said. And so you're right. I mean, internally, Mike, you talked about that. We called you the Bulldog for a reason, because you were a great leader for Sports 11, but you also had that journalistic integrity, and it was never more on display than it was during that time. You took a big risk.
But it ties in to why we're all here tonight, today, now, whenever this is. It ties in the fact that we wanted to be different. We wanted not just to do the same. We didn't just want to do sports how it's been done. I could have found out about this information listening to this guy tell me what's going on in the Flames dressing room and said, "Oh yeah, that's too bad. Well, hopefully they can pull it out, those boys." And I could have done a different kind of story. But we had that piss and vinegar. We wanted to be different. We had the physical attributes to want to be different and do it. And that, I think, led to the comedy, to the differences, and what made us the show. I don't know if you guys agree on that or not.